Hello and welcome to part 2 in a series of videos that I'm putting out this week where I break down all the fights taking place this weekend at UFC 242 from a betting perspective. Now, I've already covered the main event on this card between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Dustin Poirier. You can find my breakdown for that fight in part 1. I will leave a link to that video in the description below. And please, if you enjoy these breakdowns, if I have helped you to make money in the past, please hit the like button. It will help the channel grow. It would make a big difference and it would mean a lot to me. And please, if you haven't yet subscribed already, please hit the subscribe button. I'm trying to hit 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so every single person that hits that subscribe button will make a big difference. I really appreciate it. And now let's jump right into the fight talk. Like I said a few moments ago, we've already covered 3 fights on this card. And in today's video, I'm going to be going through another 5 fights. And some of the more juicier, interesting fights on the card will be covered in today's video. But before we get into talking about some juicy ones, let's get a fight that is probably not going to be the most interesting for betting out the way. A fight that features a very heavy favourite. I mean, there are so many fights on this card featuring a heavy favourite. And Tukhugov is probably the biggest favourite on the card, as long as the odds haven't changed too much from when I last checked. If we scan through, he's not actually the biggest favourite on the card anymore. He did open up as the biggest favourite. Yeah, he was around about a 1.18 favourite initially, which is minus 556, but since then his odds have improved a little bit. I'm not surprised. Leroy Murphy is pretty decent. We'll get into that in a few moments. But Tukhugov is best known for the guy that punched Conor McGregor after the Khabib Nurmagomedov fight and then went onto social media to brag about it. So if you haven't seen it, this is the end of the fight between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor, and we will see our boy Tukhugov pop up in just a few moments and take a pot shot at Conor. So here is the craziness that unfolded after the fight, where Khabib goes full WWE and jumps the cage to attack Dylan Dennis here with the blonde highlights. And in amongst all that, his mate, his close friend, his training partner, Tukhugov, jumps the cage here. We can see this is Tukhugov here in the black t-shirt. He jumps the cage and any second now takes a little pot shot at Conor just by there before being restrained by security and gets dragged out of the octagon. So Tukhugov is best known for taking that pot shot at Conor McGregor, and he did pay the price. He suffered a suspension at the hands of the Nevada State Athletic Commission after that, which means he's been inactive over the last couple of years while he's been basically serving that suspension. And Dana White did famously say after the fight that Tukhugov would never ever compete in the UFC again after throwing that punch at Conor. But Khabib clearly has a lot of influence, because less than, how long ago was that? Let's have a look at Khabib's record. Not too sure exactly how long ago it was, around about a year, I think. Let's take a look. Conor McGregor. Yeah, just less than a year later, a year after Dana White said Tukhugov would never compete in the UFC again, he is back like the Renegade Master to take on Leroy Murphy in this fight in Abu Dhabi. And I'm glad he's back, because he's bloody excellent, to be honest. It's quite disappointing that we haven't seen much of him. You know, this will only be his 5th fight in the UFC, which is kind of crazy when you think he's been competing in the promotion since back in 2014. And a young guy like this at just 28 years old should be competing much more frequently than he is, but we haven't seen him for the last 3 years due to, a failed drug test, a fight that he got pulled out of. He was supposed to be fighting Akhmedov on this card, but the UFC did actually pull him for that incident with Conor. But now he's back less than a year after that incident. And the only thing that is a little bit annoying about this, I mean, I don't want to see anyone get banned from being able to make money in the UFC and earn a living. I'm glad the UFC are letting Tukhugov fight again. You know, at the end of the day, all is fair in love and war. Didn't really have too much of a problem what he did after the fight. You know, there's a lot of beef between that team. Who knows what has been said behind closed doors without the cameras pointing on Conor and Khabib. You know, clearly Tukhugov was quite pissed off with Conor, and like I say, all is fair in love and war. But the thing that annoys me about the UFC is the lack of consistency. Obviously, you know, Tukhugov basically did exactly the same thing as what Paul Daley did all those years back against Josh Koscheck, and yet when Dana White said then that Paul Daley would never fight in the UFC again, he stuck to his guns and he never let Daley come back into the UFC. And Tukhugov basically did the same thing in pot-shotting a fellow fighter after the fight, and yet a year later he's allowed to compete in the UFC again. Not fair, and something that a guy like me is particularly salty about, because I'm British. Paul Daley's one of my favourite fighters of all time, and you know, back then there weren't that many, you know, top-ranked, world-class British MMA fighters that we could root for in the UFC. So when Paul Daley got cut all those years ago for punching Josh Koscheck after the fight, it was like a dagger to my heart. You know, it was like a dagger to my heart. So no consistency, but you know, I wouldn't want to see Tukhugov get banned for life. I guess the point I'm trying to make is I wish they hadn't banned Paul Daley for life. But Tukhugov is back now, and he is fighting Lerone Murphy. Lerone Murphy. Hopefully, I think it's Lerone with the E. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing it correctly. And obviously, this is a very difficult assignment for Lerone Murphy. He's only 28 years old. You know, he's a young, inexperienced fighter at 8-0. He has only ever competed in a really low level of promotion, a really small, tiny little promotion on the European circuits. You know, isn't even one of these guys coming in from semi-decent European promotions like a KSW or a Cage Warriors. You can see, you know, the promotions he's been fighting in at a very low standard. So, you know, going from competing in promotions like this, you know, Celtic Gladiator and Evolution of Combat, to go in and competing against a very tough, well-rounded Russian on a huge UFC event in Abu Dhabi, it's going to be very difficult, particularly because obviously Tukhugov, you know, he's a proud Muslim fighter. The majority of people in that crowd in Abu Dhabi are going to be Muslim. I mean, let's face it, the UFC are holding this event in Abu Dhabi purely because of Khabib Nurmagomedov and his religion. You know, the fact that he is a very proud Muslim and he's got that entire community, that entire religion on his back. They're all supporting him, and the Muslim fighters competing this weekend are going to have a lot of support from the crowd. So it's not going to be easy for a young, inexperienced fighter like Lerone Murphy to go into a place like Abu Dhabi and fight such a tough opponent in their UFC debut. And of course, we know that a massive percentage of fighters that make their UFC debut lose, and it's certainly no picnic fighting Tukhugov. And I mean, even though Tukhugov hasn't fought since 2016, the fact that the last time he fought, he only lost a close split decision to an absolute beast like Renato Moicano. You know, Renato Moicano is, you know, one of the top 5 featherweights in the world. The fact that Tukhugov was involved in such a close matchup with Moicano just highlights how good he is. Tukhugov's excellent. I'm looking forward to seeing how he looks in the octagon this weekend, particularly because he's obviously been training with a very, very high level opponent, you know, in the gym with the likes of Islam Makhachev and Khabib Nurmagomedov every day for the last 3 years. You know, the last time we saw him, he was just 25 years old. So I'm sure Tukhugov's going to improve a hell of a lot. And who knows, man? I mean, Tukhugov right out the gate could be a top contender. Right now, as it stands, Tukhugov might be a top 5 featherweight for all we know. And after Saturday night, you know, if Tukhugov can remain a little bit more active than he has been, you know, perhaps we'll have a new contender in the featherweight division. You know, everyone's talking about Zabit Magomedsharipov as being the Russian dark horse in that featherweight division, but maybe Tukhugov's going to throw his hat in that ring because he's an excellent fighter from what we've seen from him. Now, before we get into talking about how these fighters match up from a stylistic point of view, I'll just play a little bit of footage from Lerone Murphy in the background so that the points I make about this fight are backed up by footage. You know, if only I could show you footage for every fight, my job would be a lot easier. But of course, the UFC copyright machine protect their material vociferously, which is the reason why I'm not able to include UFC footage in these breakdown videos. But we will show you some footage of Lerone Murphy now from his fight back in November 2018, so just under a year ago, against Eitan de Pape. And this fight took place at Celtic Gladiator 22. Just before we go into showing you that fight, I just want to make the point that, as you can see by the records of Lerone Murphy's opponents, hasn't fought a very high level of opponent. And that is one of the main things that's causing me problems in trying to accurately cap this fight, because you know, there's no doubt about it that Zubair Tukhugov should be a big favourite here. And he's currently around about odds of 1.25, which is minus 400. And I mean, that's absolutely deserved. This guy is a young, hungry beast. Like I said, trains with some of the best fighters in the world on a day-to-day basis. Sorry, my dog has just walked in. And he's trying to get my attention, but I'll ignore him and just focus on you guys. So yeah, Tukhugov, you know, trains with some of the best fighters in the world, cardio for days, very, very tough, very good everywhere, sharp, fast, technical striking. He is a strong wrestler, high-level grappler. He's going to have the crowd in Abu Dhabi behind him. He's a total nightmare. He deserves to be the big favourite here. This is a huge mountain to climb for a young, inexperienced fighter like Lerone Murphy to take on in their UFC debut. But when we look at the odds on this fight, if we tap Tukhugov's odds into the implied probability calculator, we can see that he's currently around about a 1.24 favourite, which is minus 417 for an implied probability of about 81%, which means in order to get any value on Tukhugov, you know, in order to be able to justify putting him into a parlay or an accumulator, you've got to give him an 86 to 87% chance of winning to get any kind of value margin over the bookies. And as you guys know, you know, if you understand probabilities, you'll understand that it's very difficult to do that. I mean, Tukhugov might get disqualified. He might, you know, throw an illegal strike and get disqualified. He might throw a kick and snap his leg, Anderson Silva style. You know, he might have a bad weight cut, might get flash KO'd. There's all kinds of things that can happen, which makes it very, very difficult to cap anyone at 86 to 87% in a goddamn cage fight. And I certainly can't get there with Tukhugov, because Lerone Murphy does look pretty decent. You know, I'm not opposed to betting on big favourites, as long as I feel confident in saying that they virtually have no way to lose. And I don't feel confident enough to say that about Tukhugov, simply because, you know, in the past he has shown that he can be a little bit passive, which is why his last two fights have ended by split decision. You know, he's one of these Dagestani fighters that is very, very reactive to their opponent. He doesn't like to push the pace. He likes to react to what they're doing, which means if his opponent isn't leading, he's not really working and doing anything, which means quite often he doesn't put his stamp on rounds, and his fights tend to be closer than they need to be, because he is absolutely excellent. If he actually led and applied himself, he could probably blow most guys in the featherweight division out of the water. But that passive fighting style is a little bit of a concern, you know, a little bit of a red flag, a little bit of a warning not to put him into a parlay or an accumulator as a huge favourite without a ton of value there. And also the fact that Lerone Murphy does look pretty good. I mean, he's certainly not a bad fighter. I mean, he's certainly probably going to lose, but, you know, definitely not a fighter that you would just completely count out. You know, not a bad fighter at all. You know, reasonably strong wrestler. And you can tell just by the way that he moves that he's quite good. The problem that I have with Lerone Murphy is that I'm struggling to kind of gauge exactly how good he is, because he has only fought a very low level of opponent in the past. You can see some of the records here: 4-5, 7-39. Mr. Nathan Thompson, why are you still competing? 5-10, 4-8, that kind of thing. Now, that doesn't usually bother me. That's not usually something that I care about. It's not a big deal at all, because I always say, it doesn't matter who a guy has fought. I hate it when people are like, oh, this guy shouldn't be such a big favourite because he hasn't fought anyone, sort of thing. I hate that. Usually just by watching someone compete against anyone, you can tell by the way they move, the way they conduct themselves, how good they are. And from the way that Lerone Murphy moves and conducts himself, he looks pretty damn good. But difficult for me to gauge exactly how good he is, because the opponents that he's faced over the last couple of years have basically offered him no resistance. They've basically given no resistance. If he shot a takedown, they've given up the takedown very easily, and in striking range they have basically gone into a defensive shell and been afraid of Murphy's technique and power. So it's difficult for me to gauge exactly how good Lerone Murphy is, but he looks decent. He looks pretty good. Is he good enough to beat Tukhugov? Probably not, but I'm seeing enough from him, and I'm seeing enough red flags in Tukhugov's passiveness to know that it's not a smart idea to put Tukhugov into a parlay or an accumulator as a big favourite, just because even though he should win, there's really no value in the odds. That implied probability is dead accurate. So steer clear, boys. Steer clear. Don't gamble, and don't put your money in a weak position. If you were to put Tukhugov into a parlay or an accumulator, that would definitely be a weak position, so don't fucking do it. Right, the next fight that I want to talk about in today's video is one of the more interesting fights on the card, because it is one of the more competitive fights on the card. We're going to talk about Omari Akhmedov against Zach Cummings, and this is obviously one of the most interesting fights to talk about on the card, because the odds are roughly even. We see Akhmedov currently around about a 1.83 favourite, which is minus 120 for an implied probability of 55%. And if we look at the odds on Zach Cummings, he's currently around about, call it an average of 2.0, which is plus 100 for an implied probability of 50%. So by the odds, this is very close to a 50-50 fight. Bookies struggling to see which way this fight goes, because they've capped the odds roughly at even, and the public are basically agreeing with them because they haven't bet either guy down to being a significant favourite yet at the moment. Omari Akhmedov is just a slight favourite, and in terms of this event, this is the kind of fight that gets me a lot more interested than Dustin Poirier against Khabib Nurmagomedov. I know everyone's excited for the card this weekend. I know that everyone's talking about Poirier against Khabib. But truthfully, Poirier versus Khabib is not that interesting for me personally, simply because I feel that the odds are very accurate. I do think Khabib's going to win, but he's a big favourite, so there's just no opportunities for me to make money there. So, when I research a fight like Poirier and Khabib, don't tend to spend that much time on it, just because the odds are spot on, and it's just not that interesting to me. I'm a professional gambler. I'm only looking for opportunities to make money. So, when I see a fight like Omari Akhmedov against Zach Cummings, where the odds are very balanced, for me, that's a potentially good opportunity to make money if I can get a really strong read on this fight and side heavily towards one of these guys, because you're going to get a good return on your money if you were to bet one of these guys, whereas the Poirier versus Khabib fight's not that interesting from a betting perspective. So it's very interested to get into this one, and Zach Cummings was one of the first names that jumped out at me when I was first scanning through this card, because like I say, there's so many heavy favourites on this card. This really isn't a very good card for betting at all. I mean, if we look through the card, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got 8 heavy favourites on an event with only 13 fights, which is pretty shitty, really. Doesn't give us as many opportunities to make money as we'd like with so many heavy favourites that probably should win. So yeah, Cummings, seeing him as a slight underdog. Actually, he's one of the first names that jumped out at me, and his name jumped out at me because, let's be real, Omari Akhmedov has got a lot of weaknesses that someone like Cummings could potentially exploit. You know, Akhmedov's very one-dimensional and very predictable. You know, his offensive wrestling isn't that strong. Zach Cummings certainly has good enough takedown defense to keep this fight standing. Definitely don't see Akhmedov being able to take this fight to the ground. And when I call Akhmedov, you know, one-dimensional and predictable, it's because he tends to just spam the same left-right hook combo over and over and over again, and it's quite easy to read. And for that reason, most of his shots fall short. And because he's constantly winging, you know, these big wide hooks, he doesn't really throw strikes with effective technique. So he has quite an inefficient style of striking, which means that he does slow down as the fight progresses, as his arms start to get tired, because he's throwing these big, you know, looping hooks that don't really have the correct technique on them. And because he spams the same left-right hook combo over and over again, he is quite predictable. He is quite an easy fighter to get a read on. Having said that, there is no denying that both these fighters are on opposite trajectories. You know, Omari Akhmedov is a guy with a lot of weaknesses. You know, big-time cardio issues, tends to start to slow down quite bad in the second round. But since moving and training at American Top Team, you know, here we can see him with Edson Barboza, that's also competing this weekend. We'll get into Edson's fight in part 3 of this video, and also here's Muslim Salikov, who's competing this weekend. We'll get into his fight in part 3 as well. But since Omari Akhmedov has started to train at American Top Team at the main ATT gym in Florida, he has been making some pretty big improvements. And while his cardio is definitely still an issue for him, what I would say is that he is getting a lot better at pacing himself. So, you know, even though he does still slow down as the fight progresses, he doesn't come out the gate super aggressive like he used to, and then, you know, dumps hard in round 2 like he used to. He's got a lot better at pacing himself, and even though he still gasses out, his overall pacing and tactics are a lot more effective than they used to be since training at ATT. But having said that, it is still quite an easy fight for Zach Cummings if Zach Cummings shows up and performs to his full potential. But the problem is, just a few moments ago, we were talking about both these guys being on opposite career trajectories. And there's no doubt that Zach Cummings is on quite a steep decline at the moment. And it's one of these declines that really snuck up on us and came out of nowhere. You know, Zach Cummings used to be a very, very good fighter. You know, very aggressive, excellent chin, excellent cardio, fought at a high pace, high level grappler, strong wrestler, you know, decent striking, you know, not the tightest of techniques, but one of these, you know, hard-nosed, blue-collar type fighters that would get in your face, rough you up, and they were reasonably good at everything. You know, Zach Cummings, you know, used to be one of those guys that didn't really have any big weaknesses that you could exploit, and that made him a very difficult opponent. But for whatever reason, in this time frame here, between 2016 and 2018, I mean, Zach Cummings really declined quite hard and quite suddenly. You know, the Zach Cummings that we saw fight Santiago Ponzinibbio in 2016 is not the same Zach Cummings we've seen over the last couple of years fight Trevin Giles, Trevor Smith and Michel Prazeres. And I mean, this fight against Ponzinibbio was an absolute war. Cummings certainly took a lot of damage in this fight, so maybe it was a career-changing amount of damage, maybe it affected his confidence, you know, maybe some brain trauma or something took its toll on him, I don't know, but hasn't been the same since this performance against Ponzinibbio, and he has certainly looked quite poor over the last couple of years, which makes this a difficult fight for betting, really, because if both guys show up and perform to their full potential, I'm very confident Zach Cummings is going to win this. But over the last couple of years, Zach Cummings has demonstrated a particular weakness that I feel could get him into a lot of trouble against Omari Akhmedov. And that weakness is that he's now very passive, very, very passive indeed. throws a very low volume of strikes per round. He shows no urgency, doesn't really go epigear when he's behind on the scorecards, and his really passive, low volume style of fighting now sees him only throw maybe 10 to 15 strikes per round, which isn't great when you don't really carry that much power in your hands and you're not really going to do that much damage to your opponents, which does describe Zach Cummings. He's more of a volume guy than a power striker. And that's a really significant detail to pay attention to here, because I personally believe that the Muslim fighters competing on this card are going to have a huge advantage. Like I said, the whole reason why the UFC are going to Abu Dhabi is because Khabib Nurmagomedov is such a huge star over there. And, I believe that all the, the Muslim fighters are going to have a lot of support from the crowd in Abu Dhabi. And obviously in close fights, when you have a lot of support from the crowd, when you've basically got home advantage on your side, in a close fight the judges are more likely to side with you. And while I do think, from a technical point of view, Zach Cummings is better than Omari Akhmedov everywhere, his passive style of fighting over the last couple of years is a really big concern here, because if he does fail to put his stamp on rounds, if this does tend to be a close fight because Cummings is a little bit gun shy and doesn't really throw that much throughout the fight, then, with Akhmedov basically having home advantage, the judges are going to be more likely to side with him. So that's why this fight is really tricky from a betting point of view, because both guys are round about dead even. To get any value here, you'd have to cap either guy at around 60%. And it's tough for me to get there with Akhmedov because he's got really bad cardio. To be quite frank, I just wouldn't bet on him, simply because I think if Zach Cummings does show up and perform to his full potential, if he does show up and look like he did back in 2016 against Santiago Ponzinibbio, I think he wins easily. But at the same time, I'm not rushing out to bet on Zach Cummings either, simply because I don't feel like I'm getting a very good deal here. Cummings has looked quite passive over the last couple of years, and betting on a guy like Cummings that is quite passive, that struggles to put their stamp on rounds, is asking for trouble when you're betting on a fighter competing against someone that's probably going to get the nod from the judges if the fight ends up being close, due to kind of home advantage in a weird kind of way, due to religion. So that fight is going to be a clear pass for me at the moment, but I will keep an eye on the odds. If Zach Cummings' odds were to improve, into around the 2.30, 2.40 territory, that would plus 2.30 is plus 130 moneyline odds. That would give Zach Cummings an implied probability of 43%, and at that point I would become interested in betting on him, because where I personally cap this fight at around 50-50, that would give me a nice 7% margin over the bookies, and the odds do seem to be moving in that direction. You can see a few green arrows on the upside here, red arrows on Akhmedov to show that the odds are declining. Cummings' odds are improving slowly. Maybe they get there, who knows. Either way, I'm not too bothered. I'm going to pass on this fight, but may look at it again if the odds change significantly. So that is it for that fight, guys. We now go on to the next fight, which is going to be Diego Ferreira against Mirbek Taisumov. And just at the beginning of this video, we were talking about well-rounded Dagestani nightmares when we were speaking about Zubair Tukhugov. And in the same video, just a few minutes later, we're going to talk about another Dagestani nightmare in Mirbek Taisumov. Taisumov is the worst kind of opponent to face in mixed martial arts, because he basically has absolutely no weaknesses. The guy is a total fucking nightmare. He's amazing. He like I say, he's one of the few guys without any weaknesses. He is an amazingly technical striker with legit KO power in every shot. He throws a very wide range of strikes, crisp, hard, fast technical kicks, excellent boxing. He's also very tough. He's got an amazing chin. He's got amazing cardio. He's basically impossible to take down. His takedown defense is gravity defying. And before everyone rushes to the comments to remind me of how Michel Prazeres grinded him out in 2014, Yes, I know Demi, Michel Brazeres did grind him out in 2014, but that was 5 fucking years ago. And since then, Mairbek Taisumov has been training very, very hard with multiple Olympic wrestling teams, including the Turkish Olympic wrestling team. And he also trains at Tiger Muay Thai. And since 2014, he has developed bulletproof takedown defense. It's now basically impossible to take him down and even harder to hold him down, which is an important detail to pay attention to in this matchup, because Diego Ferreira is obviously a grappler, but yeah, there's absolutely no doubt in it. Mairbek Taisumov is an absolute nightmare opponent for anyone, but unfortunately, just like with Tukhugov, these advantages come at a price, because if we look at the current odds available on Taisumov, we can see that the average odds are currently around about 1.36, which is minus 278, for an implied probability of 74%, which means to get any value here on Taisumov, you've got to cap him at having around about an 88 to 89% chance of winning this fight. And if you know anything about MMA, if you know anything about probabilities, you'll know it's very difficult to cap a fighter at that probability, because like we've mentioned earlier on in the video with Tukhugov, MMA is a crazy sport where anything can happen. You know, Taisumov could throw his hand and get a compound fracture and the ref would stop the fight. He could get a bad cut, ref would stop the fight. You know, he could get disqualified, he could have a bad weight cut. There's all kinds of things that could happen, so it's difficult to get to that percentage, especially when someone's fighting a talented, dangerous opponent like Diego Ferreira. You know, Ferreira is a very, very skilled fighter, high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, strong grappler, decent boxer, a very, very good fighter, not a fighter that we should be dismissing. However, and I'm not going to discuss Ferreira from a betting point of view, simply because, you know, if we look at his odds, he's currently around about, call it a 3.25 underdog, which is plus 225 for an implied probability of 31%. You know, to get any value on Ferreira here, you've got to cap him at around 40%, and I cannot get to that number because, to be quite frank with you, Taisumov's fucking brilliant. I mean, I am not exaggerating when I say there aren't many guys who I would cap at 40% over Taisumov in the division. That's how good this guy is. I do think he is skilled enough to be a top 5 lightweight in the UFC. I just think that the UFC have been slow rolling him. I think he's been quite inactive, but I think, you know, at just 31 years old, over the next couple of years, we will see Taisumov develop into a top 10 fighter and 100% you know, start to take out some big names in the division. That's how good Taisumov is. He's absolutely excellent. So there's no way you can bet on Ferreira here, because even though the odds are enticing, you'd have to cap him at 40% to get there, and I can't do that. So if we look at this fight from a betting perspective and how they match up, you know, I actually think this is quite a tricky matchup for Diego Ferreira, because even though, you know, he does have decent boxing, he is primarily a grappler. He is primarily a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. And like we said, Mairbek Taisumov's takedown defense is absolutely spectacular. I don't think Diego Ferreira's got the offensive wrestling to take Taisumov down. And even if he did catch Taisumov with, you know, a trip or a scramble or something, Taisumov's incredibly good at exploding back to his feet. So unlikely Ferreira would be able to hold him down. So this fight is probably going to be contested standing up. And if the fight stays standing, Taisumov has quite a big advantage. I mean, like I say, no disrespect to Diego Ferreira, he's a very decent boxer. He's going to cause a lot of guys problems standing. You know, we've seen him pretty much use his striking to beat guys like Rustam Khabilov and Olivier Aubin-Mercier, who are absolutely no joke. You know, Diego Ferreira just kind of uses his BJJ these days as a fallback when fights do go to the ground, but he's more than happy to stand with guys. But if this fight stays standing, I do think it's a very difficult matchup for him, because the speed gap is huge here, and as you know the expression, Speed kills. Speed is an important factor in combat sports, and particularly striking. And Mairbek Taisumov has a massive speed advantage. Fast hand speed, just technique, just fast twitch muscle. Overall, crisper, sharper, faster striking. And I believe that's what will be the difference here. A tiny red flag, though. One tiny red flag with Taisumov is that in his last fight against Desmond Green, did put in quite a passive performance. Those rounds were relatively close. It was a close fight, I guess, even though Taisumov won, but he's never done that before. Usually Taisumov fights at a high pace. He's very aggressive, very explosive. It was an out of characteristically passive performance against Desmond Green. So if he shows up and performs like he did against Desmond Green, against Diego Ferreira, I think it'll be a really close fight. But this isn't like Zach Cummings, where over the last couple of years he's looked passive. This isn't like Tukhugov, where in his last two fights against Felipe Nova and Renato Moicano he's looked passive. Even though Taisumov looked quite passive against Desmond Green, he'd never looked passive before. With Tukhugov and Cummings, there was a trend there. With Taisumov's, there's not. There's not, which makes me think that his performance against Desmond Green was just a bad day at the office, just an off night. And against Diego Ferreira, he's likely to be back to his usual aggressive, dangerous, nightmarish, evil self. And I mean those words with the utmost of respect, the most complimentary I can be about Taisumov. I think he's an absolutely incredible fighter. And once again, the point stands about home advantage in Abu Dhabi. Taisumov, he's going to have the crowd behind him. And if the fight did end up being close, like his fight against Desmond Green, the judges will probably give him the nod anyway, because he's kind of got home advantage. Obviously he's Russian, but he's going to have the crowd behind him on Saturday night. There's no doubt about that, even though he doesn't train with Khabib, to my knowledge. I think he trains with Tiger Muay Thai and his own gym back in Dagestan. And I know that he travels around the world spending time with different Olympic wrestling teams as well. So, I think I covered everything that I wanted to say in that fight. I did. And now we go into the next fight. I thought I was just about to say the final fight, but it's not. We got two fights left to cover. The penultimate fight that I want to talk about in today's video is Belal Muhammad versus Takashi Sato. So, on a card like this, with so many big favourites, a clear and obvious strategy to make money is to identify 2 or 3 favourites who have significant advantages over their opponent and put them in a parlay or an accumulator together to try and get a nice easy winner. It is a strategy that I personally like to use, and it's nice to get a couple of big favourites on a card that get easy wins, and you get a nice sweat-free profit at the end of it, because you're taking 2 heavy favourites that win easily, parlaying them together for better odds. Nice, easy winners. But in order to place bets like that, and in order to parlay heavy favourites together, again, you need to be confident that the guys you're putting into these parlays and accumulators have basically no way to lose. And when I was skimming through all the fights taking place at UFC 242 before beginning my research, Belal Muhammad was one of the first names that jumped out at me as a potential first leg for a parlay and accumulator on a card with so many heavy favourites, so many candidates there. 8 different candidates, 8 different heavy favourites that you could potentially sling into a parlay or an accumulator, a 2 or 3 leg, just something small to suck a bit of extra value out of the odds. But with bets like that, again, you need to be confident that the fighters you're putting in have virtually no way to lose. And in order to gauge whether you're placing a good bet or not, you need to understand probability. And if we look at the current available odds on Belal Muhammad, His current average odds are around about 1.27, which is minus 370 for an implied probability of 79%. So to get any value on Belal Muhammad, you have to cap him at roughly 85%. And like I've said so much in this video with Tukhugov and Taisumov, there's a whole host of reasons why it's difficult to give anyone that kind of probability in MMA, because it's a cage fight to the death until the referee steps in and stop it or 15 minutes expires, and there's a whole host of things that can go wrong and cost you money that are completely outside your control. So in order to be profitable on these kind of bets, even if you're throwing fighters like this in the parlays and accumulators, you have to have an incredibly high win rate, you know, just to even break even if you were to take one loss in like 5 or one loss in 4. So they are a dangerous game to play. So when you do pull the trigger on bets like this, you need to feel very, very confident you've got your money in a super strong position, and the fighter that you're betting on basically has no way to lose. But Belal Muhammad was a really strong candidate for putting into a parlay accumulator, because he has the exact quality you need, the one quality you need for putting fighters into bets like this. Because of course, in such an unpredictable sport where fighters underperform all the time and go through bad weight cuts and they fight injured, you know, all these things that can lead to a fighter losing, Belal Muhammad has that one quality you'd be looking for when betting a heavy favourite, and that quality is consistency. Belal Muhammad's ruthlessly consistent. He always shows up and performs to his full potential. He always shows up and gives you 100%. He always shows up with good cardio and aggressive fighting style. Fights at a high pace. He's reasonably good at everything. He's very consistent. So he certainly does tick every box in terms of X factors for a fighter that you would want when considering putting him into a parlay and accumulator. But remember, in terms of the implied probability, if we go back to it, if we look at his odds of 1.27, you've got to cap him at around about 85% here to gain any value on his implied probability of 79% from the odds of 1.27 at minus 370. And like I say, that's aggressive. And while he does tick a lot of boxes, like I said, in order to bet a guy like this at these odds or put them into a parlay and accumulator, they have to have virtually no way of losing. And when researching this fight, I can absolutely tell you that there is a chance he loses this, which means you can't bet him, you can't put him into a parlay or an accumulator. There's just no value there. And the way that I see him potentially losing this fight, you know, I don't see him losing. I actually think it's a very good stylistic matchup for him and he could win easily. But the way that he could lose is there is a chance that Takashi Sato exploits Belal Muhammad's quite poor striking defense. And I hate to use the word poor because I do respect these fighters so much. They've got bigger balls than I will ever have, and I absolutely love Belal Muhammad. You guys know I'm super high on Belal Muhammad. We won a lot of money on him a few months ago when we bet big on him to beat Curtis Melender. But you cannot deny that he does have the weakness of not the best striking defense. You know, we've seen Belal Muhammad get dinged quite a lot, you know, rocked, dropped, wobbled. Tends to happen quite a lot. And Takashi Sato does have a lot of power in his hands. He's quite a dangerous striker. So there's a definite risk to Belal Muhammad that the Sato could knock him out. Now, I don't think it'll happen because Belal Muhammad actually has a very easy route to victory, because Takashi Sato's got quite poor takedown defense and a low-level ground game, and Belal Muhammad's got good offensive wrestling, heavy top game, and he's very, very active from top position, which makes it really difficult for referees to stand him up when he gets that takedown, because he's constantly working to improve his position or beat his opponent up with vicious ground and pound. So that's an easy path to victory for Belal Muhammad. If he comes out and uses his wrestling, should be able to beat Sato easily. But the problem with Belal Muhammad is he doesn't always use his wrestling enough. And quite often he only uses his wrestling to either steal rounds or try to steal rounds, or goes to his wrestling when he's been hurt in stand-up. And one of the things that really concerns me about this fight for Belal Muhammad is that he tends to try and win a stand-up fight first before going to his wrestling. And that often results in him getting dinged or rocked or wobbled or dropped in a fight before he'll actually think, holy fuck, like, I better stop playing with fire and actually try and take this guy down. So that is a big concern here. You know, if Belal Muhammad comes out and tries to win a kickboxing match and starts trading with Sato, you know, there is a very real risk he could get knocked out. I would feel a lot more confident in putting him into a parlay accumulator if I knew he was going to come out the gate straight away and start using his wrestling. But historically, that's not what he does. So at these big favourite odds, it is a clear and obvious pass for me. Hate to be boring. You know, I'm not going to bet on Sato because I think Muhammad's brilliant and I think Muhammad dominates, particularly if he uses his wrestling. But at the same time, there's obviously no value on our boy Muhammad either. But love Belal Muhammad. He helped us win a lot of money earlier on in this year. I think he's a great fighter and he probably gets it done on Saturday night. And also, we also have to bear in mind the fact that he's also a Muslim. He will have the Abu Dhabi crowd behind him in a very big way. And best of luck to all the boys and girls competing this weekend. And speaking of girls, we now go into the final fight that I want to talk about in today's video, and it is actually a fight that a lot of people were requesting that I talk about. I always say, you know, towards the end of these videos, let me know in the comments section below what fight you'd like to see me feature in the next video, and unanimously everyone that did comment asked me to cover a fight. Everyone was talking about this Andrea Lee versus Joanne Calderwood fight. Everyone wanted to hear me talk about this one from a betting perspective, and I can completely understand why. You know, I can completely understand why. When I again, you know, was prioritizing which fights to research when I first started, you know, running through this card on Monday morning, one of the first names that jumped out at me was Andrea Lee, and this was one of the fights that I prioritized for research because, you know, from memory, Andrea Lee I felt was better than Joanne Calderwood everywhere. I felt that she was a better striker, a better wrestler, a better grappler, and better in the clinch. And after researching the fight, I can absolutely confirm that everything that I just said is true. After watching all their recent fights, I can tell you Lee's a better striker, grappler, wrestler, and significantly better in the clinch. But remember, guys, you know, this is not about picks. You know, this channel is not about picks. I am not a guy that gives you picks. I'm only interested in making money, and all my betting decisions will revolve around whether I'm getting a good deal on a fight, whether there is money to be made in a fight, whether I have an edge over the bookies. And unfortunately, even though Andrea Lee is better than Joanne Calderwood everywhere, that does come at a price. If we look at her odds, we can see that she's currently around about an average of 1.44, which is minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. So to get any value in betting Andrea Lee, in order to bet Andrea Lee here and gain an edge on the bookie, you need to give her a 75% chance or better of winning, which is very, very aggressive for all the reasons we've discussed in this video. And that's the problem here. You know, I understand that I've broken down 8 fights now on the part 1 and 2 of this series of videos, and I always get people in the comments say, you know, you always pass on fights. You know, these videos are boring. Why don't you just tell us who to bet? Why don't you just tell us who your bets are? And, you know, the fact is, I couldn't give a shit about people like that, to be truthfully honest with you. I like to produce these videos just to present my research to you and share this information with you so that you can take it or leave it. You can use it to make your own betting decisions. That's what these videos are for. And, you know, the argument about me passing on loads of fights is true, and at the same time it's quite ridiculous because I've absolutely crushed it this year. You know, in 2019 I'm 7-1 on months. You know, we've made a profit in 7 months. We've only made a loss on 1 month, which was June. Absolutely crushed it. You know, last month in August we went 7-1 on bets for a very, 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 very nice profit. So at the end of the day, I understand that I pass on a lot of fights, and it's kind of amazing to me why people get surprised by that, because like I always say, betting sites are multinational multi-billion-dollar companies, Bet365, one of the most profitable businesses in Europe. It is their job to bait you into making bad betting decisions. Do you understand? It is their job to bait you, to force you, to entice you, to trick you into placing bad bets. That is their job, and the way that they can do that, or one of the ways that they can do that, is to accurately set odds. So that you will look at a fight card and you'll skim through all the fights and you'll see a fighter like Andrea Lee fighting a girl like Joanne Calderwood, and you'll instantly make the assumption that Andrea Lee's better than her everywhere, and you would be right, I agree she is, and you will go and bet on Andrea Lee when, in actual fact, if you understand how the odds work and the implied probabilities work, you realise that you're getting a pretty shitty deal, and it isn't a particularly great bet by the numbers, despite the fact that she probably wins, despite the fact that she is better everywhere. Now, the point I'm trying to make is a lot of guys on YouTube would take the information I'm about to present you in how these girls match up stylistically. They would establish that Andrea Lee is the better fighter of the two, and they would go and tell you that Andrea Lee is a good bet. Quite simply because they need to do it for the content. They feel pressured into giving out bets. They haven't found any bets yet. I mean, I've already capped 8 fights on this card and I haven't found a single bet. So a lot of people would feel pressure from that and feel the need to just give out any old bullshit bet just to keep you guys happy that are watching, because that's what you're here for. You're here for bets. And if I'm passing on every fight, it's boring. And other people that produce these kind of videos will feel that kind of pressure. That's why they'll give out a lot more bets than me, or that's why they'll feel compelled when it gets to this stage of the week to just toss a bet out on someone like Andrea Lee, because they're probably going to win. Does it really matter if you've got no edge over the bookies? Does it really matter if the implied probability is correct? I mean, she's probably going to win, right? No one will know, so they'll just toss out some bullshit bet. But that is not the way I work, guys, because to be quite honest with you, if I never made another YouTube video ever again, if I never got another subscriber ever again on YouTube, it would not impact my life in the slightest. I couldn't give a shit about YouTube, if I'm honest with you, because at the end of the day, my bread and butter is betting and putting money in the bank. And the way you do that is by consistently putting your money in strong positions. And if you don't see strong positions, and you force strong positions, and what I mean by that is if you just make them up in your head and kind of kid yourself into thinking you're putting your money in a strong position, then long term you'll get wrecked. You need to stay disciplined. I know that 5,000 to 7,000 people are going to watch this video and they're going to be frustrated that I haven't given out any bets yet, and they're going to be watching part 3 in anticipation that I will be sharing a bet with you guys. And that's not my style. If you're looking for that, you have come to the wrong place, because I will be honest with you right now, guys. I am a professional gambler. To make money from gambling is very, very difficult, and the way you do it is by consistently putting your money in strong positions over a long period of time, and only putting your money in strong positions over a long period of time. This means that if I don't place another bet for the rest of the year, I don't care. I really don't care, because you have to let the strong positions come to you. Don't go forcing them. Now, obviously, it's ridiculous. Obviously, I'm going to have loads of bets by the end of the year. I'll probably end up having a bet or two on this card as well. But the point I'm trying to make is, do not put your money into marginal positions because you feel pressured into placing a bet on a card that possibly has no solid opportunities. I don't care about entertaining you. I really don't. I don't care about being the smartest guy in the bar. I don't care about having a bet on every card. If I have to pass on an entire card, or 2 cards in a row, or 3 cards in a row, I'm going to do it and wait for that solid bet to come to me, because I've earned a hell of a lot more of money this year. If you've been following my advice, you've probably earned a lot of money as well. And why should we go and take good money that we have worked hard for and put it in harm's way by risking it in marginal situations on fighters like Andrea Lee, who mathematically are just not a very good bet, not a strong position to put your money. And it's very important for you to understand that, because no matter how many of you complain that I pass on too many fights, no matter how many people stop watching these videos, no matter how many people hit the dislike button, I will never change, because at the end of the day, I'm not trying to be a YouTuber. Making money from betting is my primary source of income. It is my bread and butter, and my reputation depends on grinding out wins and making money from betting, not making people happy on YouTube. So if you actually do care about making money, trust me when I tell you to pass. Trust me when I tell you to be patient and just relax. Watch my videos every week. And when I see a strong, solid opportunity, I will tell you. But so far on this card, I haven't seen one, and certainly not on this fight. So after that huge, boring speech, I guess I've got to explain why I don't think Andrea Lee is a good bet at these odds. After I told you that she was better than Joanne Calderwood everywhere, I mean, that's a bit of a contradiction, right? Well, the first step to understanding why Andrea Lee isn't the best bet here is understanding probabilities. Because even though she is better than Joanne Calderwood everywhere, her odds currently carry an implied probability of around about 69%, which means to bet her here, you've got to give her a 75% or better chance of winning, which is difficult to do for a lot of reasons we've explained in this video. She might have a bad weight cut. Women's menstrual cycles can disrupt their weight cuts in a huge way. A lot of female fighters have a problem making weight. She might suffer from nerves on fight day, and that could severely impact her performance. She could fight with an injury. Fighters fight with broken feet and broken hands all the time. Maybe she gets sick on fight day. Maybe she gets crippled by nerves and pressure. Maybe she just has a bad day at the office and isn't feeling it. Maybe she gets disqualified. Maybe she throws, like I say, a kick and breaks her foot in the first minute. There are lots of reasons why it's difficult to cap a fighter at 75%, because 75% is a huge probability to assign to any outcome. And in cage fighting, where there are so many variables, it is very difficult to get to that number. But again, you guys have seen me bet on fighters at odds like this many times. I mean, just last month we had a huge bet on Nasrat Haqparast at odds worse than this. So I don't mind pulling the trigger on these kind of odds under the right circumstances. But personally, for me, Andrea Lee isn't those correct circumstances, because there are a few holes with her. And a couple of the holes are, first of all, she doesn't have the best fight IQ. Andrea Lee, I feel, is one of these really old school fighters that doesn't understand the importance of winning rounds. She looks at a fight as a fight, in terms of she is going out there to hurt her opponent and take her opponent out and finish them in 15 minutes. And she really doesn't care about what happens on a round by round basis. She's just going for the kill for that full 15 minutes. And what that means is she does put herself in a lot of danger. She does give up position, chasing long shot submissions, which can get her into trouble, because like we know in MMA, usually the fighter on top is the fighter in the winning position. She does give up easy takedowns. She's just always going for the kill, and while that is a strength in of itself, it can also get you into trouble. I personally much prefer to bet on the TriStar type fighters that understand the importance of winning rounds. They try and steal every round, so if it goes the distance, you're confident that the fighter you're betting on has a solid chance of winning on the judges' scorecards, than a fighter like Andrea Lee that doesn't really pay attention to winning rounds, and she's just trying to go for the kill for the whole 15 minutes. And like I say, because of that, Andrea Lee doesn't have the best fight IQ. She does put herself in some bad positions, and she also has quite bad takedown defense. She does tend to give up really easy, weak takedowns. And of course, over the last couple of years, since Joanne Calderwood moved to Las Vegas to train with Roxanne Modafferi, she has started to incorporate grappling and wrestling a lot more into her game. Now, that could get her into trouble here, because in the past, she has been particularly susceptible to being caught with arm bars, but I'm sure she's she's improved on that a lot, training with an armbar specialist like Roxanne Modafferi, but at the same time, it's a submission that she has been susceptible to in the past, and Andrea Lee's armbar is pretty damn nasty, so that's something to pay attention to. Now, I do give Andrea Lee a big advantage if it goes to the ground. I actually think there's a chance quite a good chance she will submit Joanne Calderwood, but you know, I can't cap her at 75% here just because of her fight IQ, just because of the fact she gives up easy takedowns, and the fact is, if you're on the bottom, a lot of the time you're losing, and Andrea Lee finds herself on the bottom a lot, despite the fact that Calderwood's not the best offensive wrestler. Doesn't really have a heavy top game, but it's just a little bit of a red flag there in remembering that you've got to have a fighter tick every box to cap him at 75%, and for the reasons I've discussed, Andrea Lee doesn't tick every box. What I would say is that obviously both these girls are primarily strikers, so there is a good chance that this fight is contested in the most part standing, and if it stays standing, Andrea Lee should win the fight for sure. I mean, she certainly has more power than Joanne Calderwood, and what I would say is that if the fight does end up being quite close standing, if it is quite close visually, in terms of we get one of these close back and forth women's MMA fights that's very competitive, Andrea Lee will probably get the nod from the judges, simply because when the judging scoring criteria was changed in 2017, damage inflicted became one of the most meaningful scoring criterias, and Joanne Calderwood is one of these fighters that doesn't wear damage very well. She tends to get busted up quite easily, whereas Andrea Lee does wear damage a lot better. So in a close competitive stand-up fight where both girls land an even number of strikes per round, I do expect Joanne Calderwood to look quite beat up, with quite a lot of cuts and swelling and a bust nose to her face, whereas Andrea Lee probably won't be wearing anywhere near as much damage. So that could be a deciding factor, now that damage is such a key scoring criteria in MMA since the scoring criteria change back in early 2017. And that is it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. This fight is an easy pass for me. Like I say, I do think Andrea Lee wins, but I wouldn't bet her at these odds, and because I think she wins, I wouldn't take a gamble on Calderwood either. If you did like this video, please hit the like button. It would make such a big difference and help the channel to grow. It really, really does help the channel grow. Every time you hit that like button, it does help the channel grow. I really, really appreciate the support. And also, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button. In part 1, I went through my results from last month, and we talked a little bit about our results from 2019. If you go back and watch that video, you'll see that I'm the real deal, and you can see that I've helped a hell of a lot of money, I've helped a hell of a lot of people over the last 6 months since I set this YouTube channel up, make a hell of a lot of money, and even longer, dating back 5 years since I set my website up, I've been helping people make a lot of money. So please subscribe, watch the videos, take my advice on board. Only put your money in strong positions. Don't feel pressured into putting your money in marginal positions because you feel like you have to place a bet on every card. Don't feel inferior if you pass on every fight in a card. It's okay to sit a card out. Be disciplined. Do not fall into the trap of putting your money in weak positions, because that is how the bookies make money. They rely on you imploding and putting your money in marginal positions. A lot of people, I promise you now, a lot of people will lose money on this card because they will place bets and put their money in marginal positions because they feel compelled to place bets. Don't do it, guys. Be smart, be disciplined. Wait for a strong opportunity to present itself. Let the strong opportunities come to you. Only put your money in strong positions. And if you only put your money in strong positions over a long period of time, it is inevitable that you will make money. A wise man told me that one day. Take care. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button. Please subscribe. Take care. I'll be back tomorrow with part 3.